Also, while you're here, why don't you just share your whole name in the chat so that I know I can just record the attendance for today's session. And here we go. Okay, so last week for those of you who were here, we had covered loops, arrays, and scope and variables. So this week we'll be building on that by learning a little bit more about objects, which are one of the most important ways to organize the data in JavaScript. We'll start with the presentation to build the concepts, and then we'll switch over to live coding so that you can see each idea in action. So, uh, so here is the agenda of today's session. We're just going to be going through the fundamentals. S- so we just start with some fundamentals, including what a JavaScript object is and the difference between dot and bracket notation. From there, we'll take a look at property management, like how to add, update, and delete properties of an object, and how to check whether the property exists using the in operator. After that, we'll just quickly move into object behavior, including the difference between properties and methods, and how this works inside an object. We'll also try to cover some more advanced topics like looping through objects, working with nested objects, and using some constructors to create multiple similar objects. And finally, we'll just wrap up with some best practices, including when to use objects versus arrays, since in real applications you will often use them together or separately as well. So, let's get started with what an object is. So let try to is an object is a way to group related information together about a single thing. Now, the first thing that I think about is kind of like a filing cabinet, where each label is a key, and the information stored under that label is the value. So objects are made up of key value pairs. That just means each piece of data has a name, and that name is the key, and a piece of information will always be attached to it, which is the value. The key is usually a string or an identifier that acts like a label, and the value is the actual data inside. That could be either a string, a number, a boolean, an array, or even another object. And syntactically, objects are written using curly braces. So in this example, we have a user object here. So the key first name has the value Alex. The key is bootcamp student is true, and the key topics completed has an array of it as its own value. So that's what makes objects powerful. They let us keep different kinds of related data together in one structured place. Now, one thing that I had to mention is that if at any point during the presentation you have any questions or if you feel like there's something that you haven't understood, feel free to interrupt me or just post your questions in the chat and I'll be sure to take a look whenever I can. Now, let's take a look at uh, let's take a look at the how we actually access the data inside it. So in JavaScript, the two main ways to access that data are dot notation and bracket notation. So the dot notation is is said to be the cleaner approach. So you just write the object name, the dot, and then the property name. So if I write person dot name, JavaScript looks inside the person object and gives me the value that is stored under the name key. And bracket notation does the same job, but the only difference here is that the property goes inside square brackets. This is especially useful when the key is stored in a variable or when the property name includes spaces or special characters. So if I know the exact property name ahead of time, dot annotation is usually simpler and easier to implement. But if the dot property name is dynamic, meaning it might change or it might come from a variable, that is when bracket notation would be the better choice. And then there are two different examples here that show how you can use the dot notation and the bracket notation as well. So the key idea here is that both notations access object properties, but bracket notation gives you much more flexibility when the property name is not hard coded. Now, now that we've understood how did we access those properties, let's try to take a closer look about the amount of operations that we can do with it. So that could be adding, updating, and deleting properties on an object. One important idea in JavaScript is that objects are dynamic. That means if an object is declared using a const, the properties inside the object can still change. So if you want to add a new property, you can just simply assign a value to a key that does not already exist. If you want to update a property, you assign a new value to a key that already exists. You can either use dot or bracket notation. It depends. And if you want to remove a property completely, you can simply use the delete operator to remove the property entirely. So in this example, we start with a car object that has a make and a year. Then once we add a new property called the model, and we set it to Civic. So now we know that the car object is a Honda Civic and it is probably made in the year 2021. But then we take a look and realize that the car is actually made into 2022. So that's how we use the dot notation here to update the car year from 2021 to 2022. Then we delete the car make property and entirely. And then by the end, if we log the object, what remains is the year 2022 and the model Civic. So this flexibility is one of the reasons why objects are so useful, because you can reshape them as your program needs changes. Okay. Let's look at the difference between properties and methods. A simple way to think about it is this. Properties describe what an object has, while methods describe what an object can do. Properties are basically data values stored on the object. These are usually nouns like name, age, color, price, is bootcamp student, is bootcamp mentor, and methods are stored on the object. These are more like verbs because they represent actions the object can perform. So you've actually already seen methods before, even if they were not inside your own objects yet. So for example, push, you remember the array methods push, pop, pull. So, or push on array or to uppercase on string are both examples of methods. And then in the example that you see on the right, the pet object has a property name with the value Fido. It also has a method called bark, and that method contains a function that logs woof woof. Sorry, that was not my best bark impression. So when we write the console log.pet name, we can access that property, and thus we are getting the value Fido. And if we call upon the pet.bark, we are calling the method so that the action runs and it prints woof woof. So the main difference is the key idea here is that properties store information while methods perform behavior. Uh, I just wanted to take a quick moment to check if any of you have any questions whatsoever. And for those of you who may have joined a little later than usual, please be sure to put your name in the chat so that I can understand who has joined this session. Can you show other method examples? Yes. I will show some other method examples when we try live co during the live coding sessions, where I will definitely be try to show as many examples as possible. I hope that sounds good. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay. If there are no other questions, I'll just go ahead. But if you think of one, feel free to put one in the chat or just raise your hand. Okay, so far we've seen how objects store data and behavior. So next we're just going to take a look at how JavaScript can check a property exists on an object using the in operator. So oh sorry, this is this operator. Okay, so let's talk about this. In a method, what does this mean? So this usually refers to the object that is currently calling that method. So for example, in person A, the introduce method uses the uses this name. So when the person A dot introduce method is called, this refers to person A, and the output would essentially be like this is this my hi, my name is Sam. And similarly, if we see the object instantiation for person B, and we call upon the introduce method, you can the output would probably be would most probably be hi, my name is Cole. So the important thing to remember is that is this is not fixed to where the function was originally returned. It depends on how the function is called. So that is why it's really important to say that this is kind of like context aware and dynamically bound in situations like this. Okay, so now that we've let's take a look at how to loop through an object. So when we want to visit every key inside an object one by one, a very common approach for this would be the for in loop. So this for in loop would go through each key in the object. So in this example, it would go through the student grades project object, and it will go through the keys exam one, exam two, and then project. So notice how inside this loop, the key is a variable. And because of that, we get to use bracket notation, not dot notation to get the value. So if we wrote student grades dot key, JavaScript would literally look for a value or a property called key. But what we actually want is for JavaScript to use the current value that is stored inside the key variable. And that is the main reason why we write student grades square brackets key and not grades dot key. So on each loop, JavaScript builds a sentence like grade for exam 1 is 88, grade for exam 2 is 92, and grade for project is 95. So the main takeaway for in this is this. So you would want to use for in loops to iterate through object keys and use bracket notation inside the loop because the property name is always coming from a variable. So now let's take a look at nested object. A nested object is simply like the name suggests, it's simply an object inside another object. This is useful for when the data has multiple levels of detail and you want to keep related information grouped together. A helpful way to think about this, it's like a filing cabinet with folders inside of folders. The main object is the big container, and the nested object is a folder inside it. And then the individual property is a specific piece of information inside that folder. So in the example in the center, we have a developer object. Inside it is a regular property with the name Maria, and then we've got the tools that she could use. And now the tools, it's not just a single value, it's another object. And then inside those tools, we have language set to JavaScript and the editor set to VS Code. So if we want the nested editor value, we drill down step by step using the dot notation. So if you want to access the editor, we would probably we would or you try to use developer dot tools dot editor. So let me just try and try to paint a picture of what the object would actually look like. So this right here is our developer object. Inside it, we have the name, and for the tools, this will be another object itself. But since this is a whole object, it will be stored as a completely different folder. And then inside those tools, you can see that there will be a language and an editor as well. So if we want to access that property, we would first go to dev, and then inside the dev, we would check for tools. And then inside that tools, we would definitely check for editor if you want to know what kind of editor that Maria wants to use. Okay, I hope this made things clear. And uh, let's see. And let's try to check whether there's a way another way to check if the property uh, exists as well. So the in operator returns true if a key exists on an object and false if it does not. So this is definitely safer than only checking whether something equals undefined because a property can still exist even if the value was intentionally set to undefined. So for in this example here, we have a book object with the title, author, and publication year. So if we check the title, the result would be true. If we check for pages, the result would be false because that key does not exist on the object. And then if we try to look for publication here, that would be undefined because we that that because that has been intentionally set to undefined. But if we try to check if this property exists, this will always this console log statement will always return true. To access the other objects, you need to create new variable. Um, yes, yes and no. Sometimes you just need to check if that property exists. But there are some key. there are some cases where you do not need to create a new variable just to access the properties inside the object. So for if the nested object is already inside another object, you can just access it directly with dot or bracket notation. So for this example, if you want to just access the author, then we could just try to print out the book dot author, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you want to store it unless you're more looking to make changes to that property itself. I hope that answers your question. Excuse me. And now let's take a look at something else. So, this is these are constructors. Now, what are constructors? They're just like a blueprint for creating objects. So, constructors are nothing but a special function that is basically a blueprint for creating multiple similar objects efficiently. So a strong constructor is just like a special function which is used to build an initialize object. The naming convention for such constructors is like always start the function name with a capital letter so that it is kind of like distinguished from regular functions, and always use the new keyword to create a unique instance. Or in this case, the instance would be an object from the constructor template. And then you'll usually notice that constructor names start with a with a capital letter like player to distinguish them from regular functions. So in this example right here, the player is just a blueprint to create as many player objects as we can. And inside this constructor, this dot name equal to name means that the new object being created will get its own name property. And this dot score means the same object will also get its own score property. Now, and then when we try to create new instances using the new keyword, JavaScript creates a brand new object, sets this to that object. So the object here would be player, and then inside the player, it fills in the values Alice and 100. And so the big idea here is that constructors help us avoid rewriting the same object shape over and over again. Okay, let's try to understand the difference between objects and arrays, since both are like different they both are collections of data, but they are used for different purposes. So arrays are typically used for ordered list of items, and then objects are used for grouping related properties. And then the order of insertion in an array is almost guaranteed. And then in the object, we could always switch the order of the objects, which is and then trying to sort them. We could sort them by key, but that is not always guaranteed. And the arrays, the elements inside arrays are accessed by the index. In this case, we'll be using new numbers like 0, 1, 2, and so on. Whereas for objects, if we had to access this element, we would try to access it by string. But there is always a way that we can combine them both. We could either create an array of objects or an object that is filled with arrays. So combining both will all allows you to manage a list of structured data. you can see right here below in this example that there is a products array which has the objects like laptop, mouse, and keyboard, which are priced respectively at like 1200, 25, and 75. So here are some key takeaways from this. From this particular and just one thing to mention about the object and arrays. So in real life, you will be often you'll see different you'll often combine them as an array of objects or an object filled with arrays, which is one of the most common data structures that you will work with. And yeah, so here are so to wrap up this presentation, here are the main ideas I want you to remember. So the first thing to remember is that objects use key value pairs and to store related data about a single thing. Second, you can access properties using dot notation for simple cases or bracket notation when the key is dynamic and contains special characters. Third, methods are functions on objects that are that define the behaviors, and this keyword refers to the object that's calling the method. And then finally, constructors are like blueprints for creating multiple similar objects in a consistent way. So with those core ideas in place, this helps you ensure consistency across different object instances. So I'll take a moment to answer any questions that you may have had about the presentation so far. Let's see. Can you please share your slides after the class? Yes, slides and this class and this recording will be shared after the class. That is something that I always do after my sessions end here. And can you show us an array of an object and an object of an array examples? Yes, I will be showing those when we move forward with the code examples that I have intended for the session. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay, if there are no more questions, let's go ahead and move into the coding question. And I will try to show examples of array full of objects and an object that contains arrays while we code. And then I'll just go through each example step by step and then try to explain what exactly this code is doing. Okay, I hope that my screen is visible. Some acknowledgements would work here too. Like, let me know if you guys can see my screen. Okay. S- Okay, so let's see. So this first example is like a very simple object that we had seen in the presentations itself. So the first line itself is just a comment. It does not affect anything. And then the next step that I would probably do is just show you, and then we just have created a car object with brand, model, and the year as well. So next thing I would normally do is I would try to access this property. We could try to create a console log statement that accesses the car.brand. And then once I save this, once I save this, you can see in this portal right here that the brand name is visible. Similarly, I could also use the bracket notation to take a look at the model. And once we do that, oh, it looks like the model is not defined here. But one thing that I totally forgot is that the keys are string values, and always remember to enclose them in quotes. This is just some mistakes that can be done, and you can see that way we can also try to add new properties. So let's try to add color. So good color, let's say it would be black. And then if I try to find if it's let's just try to figure out a way if it's been added or not, and hopefully it should get added, except I forgot to change the property here. So it's always important to make sure that the properties are updated. And as you can see, if I try to completely access the car object altogether, we can see that we can see that the entire object is printed out, and you can see all the properties that has been instantiated with when it comes to the car object. Okay, so let me try and recap the example so far. So we already created the object, and then it stores related information, and then the brand no we use the dot notation to access the property, and on line 10 we use the bracket notation, and the key always must be written as a string, and then we try to add different properties. So that was our first example. So the small issue that caught me off guard is really important. So with the bracket notation, you always write if you write model without quotes, JavaScript treats it like a variable name, but since that variable does not exist, you will always end up getting a keyword. So this one example helps. I hope this one example helped you understand like the core ideas behind an object. So let's try and let's try to take the look at the next example with students 1, 2, and 3. We have an object called student 1, and for this, what I would probably try to do is I would also create an introduce method, which would help us create should help us create a method of this console itself, and from this itself, and this would also be a good platform to demonstrate the use of this keyword. Okay, let's see what happened here. Can you create objects using let instead of const? Okay, let's try doing that. So instead of const, let's do this with let and see. Yeah, it would still work, and the main difference would be just the assignment. The student one itself will always try to create different objects as well. Just give me a moment to coming this out, and let's try to see what went wrong here. Okay. So right here after the properties, make sure if you're introducing other properties, make sure to include a comma right here so that you don't really uh, you don't really struggle with an error here. So let's say if we try to invoke the student.one introduce method, this should give us a way to access those properties inside the. Okay, there is an error here. Oh, this error is because I forgot to add the plus sign. And now if we clear it, this is how we get to see the introduce method being called, and this would be one way to use the method and not try to access the objects indirectly. If it, yes, I needed plus, though that is why the whole reason what was read. If it's constant, then how are you able to change the object? So, yeah. So one thing to understand, if it's a const declaration, you can still change the properties inside the object. What const prevents is reassigning the whole variable to a completely different object. So while this is allowed, like let's say if I wanted to change the student name from Ethan to say JD, then that still would be allowed. But what would not be allowed is if I try to assign student one to let's say this entire object that has been declared as student as student two. So I hope this clears the differences between the let declaration and the const declaration. Okay, and then similarly, if I try to create the introduction method for this, except here we will just be using the student2 dot name. This should still work. Let's try and see the differences here. So as you can see here, there are two different ways that you could access the object. You could either refer it by the referral, like the reference name. In this case, it would be student2, and you could always use this method. So let's see, if you copied that same name put to another object, this would probably attack correctly, but the student2 name would still keep pointing to student2. So that is why using this dot name and this dot grade, this keyword is usually the better practice when it comes to is usually the better practice, or if you ever want to access object properties using object methods. So this example right here is useful because it's not just shows how methods work, but it also helps you understand why your code becomes more usable. So let me just take a moment to comment this out. And now let's try to take a closer look at nested objects. So this nested objects, what we will be doing is that we'll just be adding another property that's called address, and that address will be another object itself. The city would be Dallas, and state would be Texas, since Dallas is in Texas. So here is introduction and function. If so, why didn't we have to declare it like function introduce? Is it already defined? That's a really good question. So yes, introduce is a function. More specifically, it is a function stored as a property on the object. And then when a function is stored on an object, we call it a method. So we did not have to write function introduce separately because we are defining it directly inside the object. So let's say if I were to the dec- if I were to write this function inside an object, as long as we are using these parentheses, this is already a way to declare the functions or methods that are being created inside the object. If I had to create a similar function on the outside, so that's where I would have to use the function declaration as well, because this would not work unless I declared it as explicitly as a function. So I hope that that helped you clear your understanding as to why I didn't use the function declaration inside the object. Yes, exactly. It's acting as a key within the object, and that key in this case is just a function. So we don't have to typically declare functions like you would normally do when writing code outside the object. Keyword being outside here. So as long as that is clear, uh, let's move on to the nested objects for now. And this is one small example of the nested objects that is clear. Can we update values within that key without touching original code. Yes, we can always do that. One way to do that would be in this case, let's try to change access this property, and we'll just change it to from Vanessa to, let's say, Maria. Let's try to change if we try to change that, and then if I console log the user object, I'll just try add another console log statement here just so you can see the differences right here. Let me just clear this out. And now if I call upon this method, you can see that we are just updating the values within the key. Earlier, this user was named as Vanessa, but after I meant inside the method key. Okay. So you mean okay. Let's see if we can do that. Yeah, I think I understand what you mean, but hold on, let me see if that makes sense. So let's try another function where we change the value name. Let's call it no, no, not update. Just let's try to change the name. And always remember to add a comma, and maybe this dot name is Maria. So if I try to use declare the call on the change name method that is within user, that should be one way to change the name of a property without any explicit additions of code. So yes, this is definitely possible, as you can see right here. I hope that answers your question. Okay, so let's try to let's try to access some other properties as well, real quick, since we're kind of like less on time. So if I wanted to address the state property right here, I would just say user dot address dot state. But if I were to just access the address, I would get this entire object that with the properties city and state. Let's see what else can be done here.
Hey, me.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think I just asked the question wrong. I don't know. I'm just trying to see. So you see where you wrote change name and then you wrote this name and then you kind of updated the value from
Mm-hmm.
before. So what I was wondering is, are we able to ever change like the value that you put this dot name equals Maria? So are we able to change that as well outside of the constructor object? Or
Um,
the object, I should say.
uh, okay. So what you're trying to say is that if there is a way to change the name property from outside the object, is that what you're trying to ask?
Yeah, like kind of like if we're able to reassign essentially the value Maria for something else outside of that object.
Something else, like something else, like is it, are you talking about adding an additional property or just changing the name overall?
Whatever it is, so either or.
Okay, either or. So so this is one case where you could like change the name, and or there could be one way whether you could provide maybe a string called let's say new name or something, and then we could we could provide the new name, and let's say if you want to change it to something else, let's say Maria, maybe this could be one way to change that as well, and we could always provide different names itself. And if you're not like convinced with Maria, and this way you can always assign like different names as well without accessing the properties. So does that answer your
Okay.
question?
Yeah, so pretty much if we want to change something within there, we just use a parameter to be able to update it and call it elsewhere.
Yes, you could do that, and also as long as those objects are not like protected or private, then you could always change the value of the properties by directly referencing those.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So after running the console log statements, you can see how the object inside the object inside the object is showing up right here, and this is one way to excuse me, and this is one way to access the state property that is inside the address object, and this is inside the nested object as well. So let's take let me comment this, and let's try to loop out through objects. So the way that we could do it is we can always show could always use the for each loop, and then here we have a product, and then for, and then this would be the for in loop where you just try to understand the keys in products, and then we could just say console.log is key, and then the semicolon with the quotes, and then there is the product, and here we will be using the product dot the bracket notation that we had seen earlier in the presentations, because if so that would be one way to access the values inside each key. But if we use the dot e, this will definitely give us an error, because the keys itself aren't undefined here, and that is why the because the keys themselves are not literally named keys. So that is why you should always use bracket notations if you are ever finding yourselves wanting to loop through the key. So this is one of this. I feel like this is one of the more important rules while looping to objects. If the property name comes from a variable, use bracket notation. And now let's see if we can loop through, find a, and then we can just take a look at the constructor object. Here I've already created two different examples. And now you can see that book one has like book one and book two are separate objects with the title, the author, and the number of pages itself. So this works perfectly fine, but it also shows. So so now the most common things among these two objects is that they have the exact same strings. So when you notice same structure, so when you notice yourself repeating the same pattern, same shape again and again, this is usually a sign to create a constructor. So let's try to see if we can create this pattern into this pattern of objects into a constructor. So this would probably be a book. Notice how I have used capital letters to signify that this is a constructor, and then we would just be going using the this keyword to uh, go to pass on different parameters. In this case, we'll be going for title. Similarly, we'll be going for author, and we'll be going for pages. Then we could just, instead of creating these books, we could just create the book objects like this. Just say it's a new book, and then the title would be, let's just pick this one, The Alchemist. It's written by Coelho, and the number of pages that are put in here are, and similarly, we can always create another book by using using the string values from the previous book objects, and this is how we create create objects using constructors. So this is also good, but if you find yourself repeating with like multiple find yourself creating multiple objects of the same pattern, that is a good sign to use a constructor. And okay, let's let's me just write up some console log statements real quick just to see how the book looks. Okay, and similarly, if we do it for book 4, you can see that all those book objects are visible itself. So this is like the main advantage of constructors. So instead of defining the objects that are done like before, we can always define the structure once and then reuse it to create as many objects as we need. Okay, so finally, let's try to understand the examples of objects versus arrays. So this is one. Okay, so the names is just an array because it stores multiple values in an ordered list, and then the names are can be accessed by positions 0, 1, 2, and 3. And then student is an object with key value pairs. It is an object, and so the array always answers the question, what are all the items, and the object answers the question, what details do we know about that one item. So now let's try to create another object where it is full or where it contains an array. So if you were to say, let me just try to comment this out. And then what we can also do, we could also add like an array of friends where it contains information about who are Ethan's friends. And then if we were to access the array inside this, so that would be one way to find out who are Ethan's friends. And so that is how you can access the array inside it. And if you want to be really specific, like who's like Ethan's best friend, so that would be one example just to show if you want to access like specific elements inside an array. And let's see, for the array, let's try and figure out maybe it's an array of books. So this is an array, and we could just use this. Now, for readability purposes, I'm adding each element on new line, or otherwise they can be added on the same line as well. So I'll just be numbering these so that there is a clear distinction between all these, all the elements. And now, if I try to console log this, this should give us an array that is full of objects. Let me just take a moment to clear this. And now this is one particular example of how arrays can be stored, can objects be stored inside arrays and vice versa. When you'll be working with APIs, when you'll be working with APIs in real life, you will realize that it will often be a combination of either this or this particular session. So that last example brings everything together. And so I will just take a few moments to answer any questions that you have about the coding examples or maybe this overall session in general. Just stop the recording quick and here you go.